Thanks for spending some time with us today. So, every day you read stories with shocking headlines about sometimes large organizations falling victim to data breaches, ransomware attacks, unconstrained data proliferation, and completely out of control costs. There's also story after story of CEOs, CIOs, and CTOs being fired because of it. And we're so inundated with this type of news that we've become completely numb. So numb, it's easy to miss news like CDK Global. So CDK Global is a platform that's used by more than 15,000 car dealerships across North America, and they suffered a catastrophic ransomware attack. They had to pay out $25 million in Bitcoin to end the attack. It put all of their dealerships out of commission for more than 2 weeks. Their parent company lost 6% of its value. Car dealers lost millions in revenue. Many more had their reputations completely tarnished. And that's just one single incident. These happen every day at an increasing rate, and they also happen across AEC firms. It's just the world that we live in. And so the question is why? So what is going on that's preventing many of the largest, most successful organizations from being able to manage critical data across their firm? And the answer really lies in how our relationship with data has evolved. So it used to be important. By the turn of the century, it became essential. And now we are completely reliant on data to function. But despite that shift in the importance of data, firms still manage data in the same way as they used to, with a lack of strategy. And the impact of managing data like that can be absolutely devastating. So from Pandora's experience, we look at data across all industries, but a lot across AEC. And we see there are 3 key problems surrounding data, which if you don't manage them correctly, cause firms to stall. So 1, we have complete reliance on data. That gets compounded by this unconstrained proliferation of data. So in other words, there's a mass volume of unstructured file data that sprawls across dozens, if not hundreds, of storage repositories. And then finally, as a digitally native workforce comes into senior positions in firms, their expectations around data management and accessibility are grounded in the accessibility and ease of their smartphones. So what were once considered very high expectations are now seen as completely standard. So collectively, these 3 things create a data storm, and that fundamentally jeopardizes organizational growth. None of these issues on their own is a death sentence, but when combined, they can be fatal. And it means that the role of the CIO and the IT team has never been more essential. So just as the criticality of the CIO role increases, so too does the risk to leaders in those roles and their departments across any enterprise. And you only need to ask the CIOs of companies like Blockbuster, Toys R Us, Borders. They didn't see the impact that digitization was having on their business and the centrality of data when it came to good decision making. And the consequence was failure, not just for the brands, but it has an impact on the individuals as well. And yet, some organizations absolutely flourish because they found a way to break through. And what's really interesting is that even when their goals differ, their path to success is very, very similar. So here's a few examples. Mead and Hunt wanted to improve collaboration across different sites. So they just broke down their data silos to get there. Now, during the pandemic, their productivity went up by 8%, while other firms were really struggling. Fluor needed to accelerate delivery of complex projects on a grand scale, and so they consolidated their data, they put it in the cloud, and they reduce their operating costs. And Stoke Space, which is a rocket manufacturer, needed to seamlessly deliver huge data files to their entire organization. So they put their data in their preferred cloud, and they enabled immediate file delivery across distance. And that let them become the fastest company ever to scale from initial seed funding to building an orbital class rocket. So what is the secret behind these firms? It's data. So data is at the center of everything to compete, scale, and win in the age that we're in right now. And we call it the digital age. So following the framework that Mead and Hunt and Floor and Stoke and others have become successful is they followed a framework that's allowed them to build hybrid cloud file and data systems. And the framework has 3 master steps that have to be taken in an exact order. And inside these 3 steps are some sub-steps that cannot be missed. Here's what the organization did. So the first step is they had complete visibility over their data and control over data proliferation. We call that command and control. The second step is that they made sure that their data is immutable so that if and when it's damaged, they can roll back to pristine data with minimal disruption. And that's resilience. And the third step is that they provided instantaneous access to data for the people and their processes wherever they are, whenever they need it. And we call that immediacy. Now, when we're thinking about command and control, there are 2 components. First comes visibility, because without clarity, you really have nothing at all. And given the extraordinary amount of data that organizations have to manage, it's very rare for them to know exactly what they're storing. And that means they don't understand the value of the data or the risk it presents. In fact, it's common for the director for IT teams to be not to delete any data. So what IT does know is that storage is increasing and very rapidly, but they really don't understand what they can safely delete and what they really must keep. And oddly enough, storage systems are really not known for prioritizing storage optimization. And you only need to look at the annual projections for growth in unstructured data. It's increasing at a rate of 40 to 60% every single year. That is a heck of a lot of pressure on storage volumes and teams. And that's why you've got to start with visibility. And with visibility comes insight. What data is where? What's my risk level? What data is hot and needs specific levels of security? What files are likely to need immediate access by teams who are spread all around the globe? The smart CIOs know that the ability to take informed decisions can drastically affect their company's growth trajectory. Now, once you've got that done, the next thing that becomes critically important is resilience. It's painfully obvious that organizations set a target to getting back to normal business operations in the event of data damage. In reality, most of them don't get close to that target. There are article after article, statistic after stat to show that organizations have learned the very hard way that what they say is their SLA does not survive contact with the real world. So they're not just hours off in their projections, they're weeks off. And that can have a devastating effect on any business. So you have to be able to deal with security events from the smallest incident up to the harshest ransomware attack by getting back to normal business operations with minimal disruption and without losing data. There's 2 elements inside resilience. The first one's preserve. That means that even if your data is damaged, you can rapidly roll back to pristine, undamaged data. So the big question that a leader needs to ask themselves, where they should stand multiple points of attacks, not only right now, but as their organization scales with more people, more offices, more regions, and frankly, more entry points. And that's the difference with leading resilience from immutable data. Then you can move on and focus on protect. That means that you can spot a damaging event as it's happening and interdict it, literally shut it off at the source. And that lets you quickly mitigate the potential damage because you stopped it. What may have taken you hours in the past only takes minutes, or what could have taken you days is down to hours. So true resilience comes from knowing that you can mitigate any security event as fast as possible with as little disruption as possible, and knowing that you've got clean data to restore to no matter what happens to it. So with these two components squarely in place, then you can get to immediacy, and that's the hardest of the 3 steps. But this is where the real magic happens, and it's what we talk about as invisible productivity. Just no one outside of your firm can see this, but when you enable optimization and delivery, you begin to see a dramatic acceleration forward. This is the piece that your team notices. It's also the piece that CIOs are judged on, and it's what helps firms grow faster than their competitors. So the seconds and the minutes that slow down file operations can seem quite trivial on an individual basis. Collectively, though, they are a massive cost to users every day, and they have a very stifling effect on productivity. So what our most successful customers have found is that when you let good people operate at the speed of their best thinking, then innovation truly takes root. So the organizations that followed this framework see 3 common outcomes. 100% get access to pristine data, regardless of the severity of a ransomware attack. They get up to 80% reduction in their storage volume. Now, what that means for you depends on the makeup of your files. The point is they squeeze every available byte out of the data that they have. And finally, complete and immediate global access to file data, which translates to an incredible increase in productivity and performance. So at just one of our AEC customer firms, this translated to tens of thousands of productive hours gained per year from just 200 team members. Think about what that could do to your firm. So now, with the scene set, let's jump in and show you how to achieve these 3 things. So the first of these secrets is get command and control. So in a huge number of firms, data is literally all over the place. There are Windows file shares everywhere. There's a mix of storage. Some of it's on premises, some is in the cloud. There's more on user devices. And maybe there's even some file sharing services thrown in there for good measure. IT teams are usually the ones who get lumped with the job of managing data, but they're not usually the ones generating and working with all the data. That makes it really tough for them to have any idea at all of what they're storing. So to get a sense of why that matters, it's not uncommon for firms to find when they get visibility of their data, they have a lot of storage taken up by files they don't even have the applications to open anymore. So they're just storing dead weight, not to mention backing it up, protecting it by making yet another copy to store off-site, worrying about restoring it if it gets damaged, and yet they're never going to need it again. Another really common scenario is team members leaving the firm. When they do, they leave their files behind. So now you've got files that aren't associated with anything at all. They don't have an owner. They might not even have a valid parent folder, and you don't know what's in them, which means you don't know if they pose a risk. Your legal team will probably tell you that they do. So Panzura Symphony is a data management platform. It lets you consolidate all of your file systems, object stores, and cloud services under a single database. So once you've hooked up your data sources, on a single dashboard, you can start to see exactly what's going on. So you can identify things like data consumption by owner, by Active Directory group or department, or by the type of data or by the location that the data sits in. So that visibility alone makes an enormous difference. Most solutions just let you look into individual storage devices. So once you can see your data, you can start to make better decisions. A lot of firms start with cost savings. because they're obvious. Files that aren't accessed much at all, but still need to be kept, can probably cost you less than what you're paying right now just by moving them to a different tier of storage. Or maybe you move them to a totally different storage repository. For example, you might keep your active data on premises and move colder data to a very low cost cloud storage. So Symfony on its dashboard lets you identify cost savings based on characteristics like file size, recency of access, data ownership. It helps you to identify things like redundant, obsolete, trivial data that you no longer need to keep as active. It even lets you simulate a cost reduction of relocating stale data. So with this visibility, you can decide what works for you, and then you can set policies that Symfony can follow. It's not just about cost, though. So you might archive project data once you've delivered a specific project. And again, Symfony allows you to set those rules and make it easy. Now, compliance means different things to different firms. It depends entirely on the kinds of data that you have and the regulations you have around handling it, storing it, the length of time you have to keep it. For example, if you have design data that you're mandated to keep for decades, you're going to make different decisions than data you're only required to keep for a few years. So your mandated data is going to need to be highly resilient and very easy to retrieve if required. So again, Symfony lets you establish your policies for your file and object management to meet whatever your documentation and reporting requirements are. It gives you automatic enforcement of the policies in a way that's audited so you can see exactly what's happened. Makes it really easy to put digital assets in the right location to comply with whatever your legal and contractual mandates are. Makes it a lot easier to prepare for things like regulatory audits and show that you're adhering to data protection standards. And finally, it lets you get cost-effective categorization of data so it's persistent and you can retrieve it when you need it. Okay, so now we've talked visibility, insight, and action. We'll talk about a different type of control. There is an enormous amount of duplication in today's data. So take this PowerPoint file, for example, that I'm presenting to you. I can tell you that it is substantially similar to some other files. There are images in here that I've used in other places. There are words in here that I've used in other places, complete slides that could appear in other presentations. So for argument's sake, let's say that this file is 10 megs in size. Now, traditional storage would have the active copy, then it would have a backup copy, and it would probably have a further backup copy to store offsite for extra resilience. I said before that we're at 40 to 65% growth in unstructured data. This is one of the reasons why. And when you store data locally, you make this even worse because now you've got multiple copies of the same files at every location, all of them 10 megs, all of them being backed up, all of them being replicated again for resiliency. Now hold that thought for a bit because we're about now to talk about a different way of achieving resilience that has everything to do with reduced storage times. And this brings us to the second secret, which is resilience. So what does that mean? It means you can shrug off data damage and stay on your feet, stay operational no matter what happens to you. Let's talk ransomware for a minute. Ransomware attacks are one of the worst things that can happen to a firm and to an IT team. So Panzura has had customers who have been hit by ransomware on a fairly frequent basis, just we're at the average. CIOs will call us and say, look, if you can't help us to get our data back, we're not going to be here next month. We're literally going to close the doors. Everybody's going to lose their jobs. We're facing deadlines. We've got compliance requirements. We can't do it. So this is the reality, and it's happening every single day. So immutability is a whole new way of approaching active data. What does immutable mean? Immutable is something that will never change and cannot be changed. Now, object storage, when it's configured correctly, can be used to make data immutable. So in the context of data, it means that once data is written, it can't be changed and it can't be deleted. So Panzera's hybrid cloud file services platform, CloudFS, has some really smart ways of making that happen. And it's all down to how we deal with data. So as data is generated, let's say a file is created, it's broken into blocks, and those blocks are 128 kilobits in size. They're as small as they can possibly be. So now what looks to users like a file is actually made up of blocks, and those blocks have metadata pointers recording which ones are the right blocks for that file at any point in time. So let's go back to the PowerPoint example. So let's say that this PowerPoint presentation is comprised of blocks A, B, and C. We then take a snapshot, and that captures the blocks as they are at this point in time with the metadata pointers that point to those blocks. So as I make changes to the PowerPoint, further blocks are added because we've not seen that data before. So then another user makes a copy of this presentation, but now instead of saving yet another 10 megabit file, we know that if we've ever seen any of those data blocks before, we don't have to store them again. So now a very granular deduplication can take place. So we already recognize the blocks, the data in blocks A, B, C, D, etc. So now all we have to do as file changes take place is metadata pointers to say these are the blocks that we need for this file at this moment. And if blocks A and B are used in multiple files, then we have multiple file metadata pointers pointing to those blocks. We don't ever have to save them again. So now, instead of multiple 10 meg files that are all being backed up and replicated, we now have one 10 meg file plus incremental changes. And some of those incremental changes could be tiny. We don't have to save an entire copy of all of the data. The amount of storage reduction this can give you is enormous. And as I said before, what you get depends on the types of files that you have. For example, video files tend not to have much duplication because there's always a difference in the angle of the shot. Design and project files, though, are a completely different story. So now you can easily be into saving 60, 70, 80% on your data volume. And that makes an enormous difference to your storage bill. So carry the concept of these metadata pointers forward now and think about what this means in terms of immutability and control Z for data damage that gives you a global restore point objective of less than 60 seconds. So we start with our file. Let's say this file has 4 different blocks. It's a clean file. We move those blocks into cloud object storage. Object storage is the ability to make it immutable. So once the data is in the object store, we've got it, it's safe, it's immutable. Then a ransomware attack comes along and encrypts the file. Now we've got completely new data blocks that we've never seen before. And so they are created as new data blocks. The original blocks are completely unaffected. They're still sitting in the object store. They're perfectly safe. Now we've got new blocks, and we also move those to the object store because we've not seen them before, so we know we need to take them and save them. However, because we've snapshotted, we can always restore back to the original file. And we snapshot globally once every 60 seconds, more frequently if we end up with a lot of data that needs to be stored. And so you always have clean files to restore back to, and your maximum data loss across every single location that you have is 60 seconds or less. And what's extra good about this is that it doesn't just have to be a ransomware attack. every single minute you've got users making accidental changes to files, and they can simply restore to a previous version, which is captured in a snapshot by using Windows previous version, the right click and restore. And this restoration is as fast as moving a few bytes of metadata. Now, once you restore back to clean data, the next thing is cutting down the amount of time it takes you to figure out what needs to be restored, because ransomware attacks do not run in a nice linear fashion. They can encrypt in a tentacle type fashion, so you have data in all sorts of different directories. And so the next part of this is Panzura Detect and Rescue, as an extension to this platform, spots ransomware attacks as they happen, and they stop them automatically. And they stop them by turning off the user that's affected, because that is the fastest and the least disruptive way to stop the attack without having to shut down the entire file system. Then we send alerts to admins. We tell them exactly what's happened, who did what, where to look for the files, and show what needs to be restored. And the administrator can simply roll back to the latest clean snapshot, and you're back with clean data. We've had a number of customers who've had data in Panzura, which has been back up and running. Their users have been back up and running on projects within minutes, if not hours, if not minutes. And restoring other data has taken weeks. So this is exceptionally fast. And resilience goes a step further even. So now you have no single points of failure. Let's say you're using cloud object storage. If your cloud goes down, we put you in a position where you can fail over to a secondary cloud, which has a complete and up-to-the-minute copy of your data, and you can keep on working. And so with Panzura, truly, no matter what happens, you are going to be able to keep working. Now, let's get to the third of these secrets. And here's the thing. Only immediate is fast enough. Anything else is going to slow you down. So traditional storage is siloed, like the multiple locations. You have multiple dense storage repositories at those locations. And file operations, when you work in those locations, are fast. However, when you're trying to work across locations, there's a lot of file replication and it's incredibly slow. It's also easy to miss the fact that there's functionality in Windows file shares that's inherent. It's always been there, so it's a bit like wallpaper. One of the key points to this is the ability to avoid file collisions. So when your storage is local, like we're looking at here, everyone's under the same roof, file operations are really fast. Users can access files that are on a network drive, and the built-in file locking that the software applications have recognizes that somebody's in the file, and it locks either the file or a part of the file, so you don't accidentally overwrite anybody's work. But when you put distance in the way, that stops working. And we all know that that's a bad thing. Whoever hits the save button last wins out, and you end up with file corruption. So where the file content is not what you thought it was. So file locking's been around since the concept of a network drive was first dreamt up. And it's for a very good reason. So as soon as you put distance in the mix, that goes away. And it particularly goes away if you move your files into cloud storage. Now everything slows down. The operations you relied on stop working. You've lost your data integrity. And your IT team spends hours trying to recover file versions and merge them together. So data delivery is the last and the most powerful of the secrets. And it's where high-performing firms really strap on the afterburners. And this is not obvious to the outside world, though. Effectively, though, they've figured out how to overcome the challenges we've just talked about, and they can get data to people and processes regardless of distance, regardless of file size, regardless of the number of locations they have. And it's not by doing this. However, this is something that you actually see on a not infrequent basis, where people will actually load files onto a physical device and ship it somewhere else. There's a better way of doing this. So let's talk for a minute about a hybrid cloud environment. So a virtual environment plus an object store. So your virtual environment gives you caching of your hot or active data for performance reasons. Your object storage gives you elasticity and durability and a lot of flexibility because you can pay as you go. And the object store can be a very wide range of providers. You can be completely in the cloud, or you can be completely on premises, or a mixture of both. You can even go to something super secure, like AWS have a Gov Cloud, Azure has the same equivalent for very sensitive data. So this is what Panzura Cloud FS hybrid cloud platform looks like. The core of it is a global file system. So now, rather than those 4 disparate locations, you've still got your locations, but they no longer have disparate storage. It's all centralized into an object store. Every one of those locations has a virtual device at or near it. Now, it can be in a cloud region. It still gives you a great deal of performance. And every single one of those locations has the same view of the file system as every other location. It also has a copy of the metadata for the entire file system at every location. And so every single location knows exactly what's going on minute by minute. There are 3 components to this. So the hub is where your storage is. The spokes are each of the location. And then Panzura is unique in that it has a mesh as well. And so each of these locations can talk directly to each other location. So you can end up with a situation that could be impossible, that regardless of distance, regardless of the number of locations, your users can actually work together as if they're all under the same roof. And that also means that the file operations that we just talked about, including file locking and range locking, just work with Panzura, regardless of distance. So now you've got a situation where you've created a high-performance file environment in which people can do their best work, regardless of distance, regardless of how many locations they are. They can literally be on the opposite sides of the world to each other and work together as if they're in the same location. That lets people operate at the speed of their best thinking and capture their work in the file types that you use for your data product. And that's what high-performing firms do that makes the final mile of difference. You can also extend that right out to the edge to users on mobile devices without putting them through the experience of the VPN. So CloudFS just looks to the user like any other Windows file share. There's nothing to learn. There's nothing to change. They can even get access to it from a mobile device, whether that's a phone or a tablet, and either capture data and send it back to the object store or access whatever other users have done. And so in this hybrid cloud platform, you get the ability to migrate files to an object store. It doesn't have to be the cloud. It can be an on-premises object store. You can consolidate down all of your distributed data. You can then distribute that data back out globally immediately, and it is immediately consistent. And what that means is every user sees exactly the same view of those files without waiting. When they need that data, it is there and it is up to date. It doesn't matter how far away the user was who made the last change or how recently the last change was made. So this gives you collaboration across sites that is incredibly difficult to achieve otherwise. It gives you cloud mirroring for data redundancy. It gives you immutable data and immutable snapshots, so your data is safe. And you can choose whatever object storage you prefer. You could decide that Azure public cloud is right for you. You could run something that's a completely private cloud for security purposes, or you could keep it completely on premises. And so what this gives you are not, excuse me, not just secrets of high-performing firms, but a blueprint for resilience and advantage, which is played out in some of the most competitive firms around. So your before state is where you have fast-growing data. It's not easy to track. It's very slow to deliver. And your expenses increase rapidly without the same increase in value. Your after state is complete command and control to a place where you're treating your data as it needs to be treated. You can keep on moving regardless of what happens, even if you get hit by ransomware, and you have the kind of high-performance file environment that high-performing people want to work in. That's another one of the invisible things that high-performance firms do, is they create an environment where really good people want to work because they can work at the speed of their best thinking and their greatest talent. And to round out, this is the words from one of our customers, we've been able to get our deliverables to clients faster using less man hours. If that's not a statement for return on investment, I don't know what is. Thank you very much. Missy, I will hand it back over to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Petra. And hey guys, go ahead. You can enter any questions that you have in the live chats. While we wait for that, I would like to invite you all to request a free demo of Penzura. You can simply do that by clicking the link that should show up on your screen here. And let's see if we've got some questions for you. All right, so I do have a couple that were submitted in. What kind of maximum data could I expect what kind of maximum data breach could I expect from Penzura?
Okay, a couple of things here. So Penzura is not stopping data breaches exactly. What we're doing, though, is preserving data so that there is no data loss that you can expect. So the absolute maximum data loss is up to 60 seconds globally. Nothing less will get by. And that's important as you're evaluating solutions where think of the data consistency that I just talked about. If you cannot get data immediately from every location into the object store, that is, you're doing an eventual consistency whereby region after region is syncing data to where it can become immutable, then your exposure for data loss is far greater. So with Penzura, it's a maximum of 60 seconds globally. And after more than a decade of doing this, not one single firm has lost data that has been in Penzura Cloud FS. They have lost data that is not stored in Penzura or that's been treated differently, but Penzura has a 100% recovery rate.
That is impressive for sure. All right. Okay, so does it matter how large my firm is and how many locations can I have?
Ooh, good question. It doesn't. In practical terms, what we find is there is a maximum limit, and that's the limit of the firm itself. We have global firms with over 100 different locations, and those literally are across different continents, and we're still achieving that immediate data consistency. So every single one of those locations is syncing data every 60 seconds simultaneously into the object store, which then means that we can send the metadata out to all of those locations, and every single one of them knows what is going on and what has just changed and what's new. Separately, and again, this doesn't matter about distance and it doesn't matter about number of locations. Anytime a user requests to open a file, any data that's changed that hasn't already made it into the object store is synced peer-to-peer. That's the value of the mesh that I talked about. And so when you need data, it is there, even if it hasn't made it to the object store, because you're somewhere in the middle of that 60-second sync time.